Prior to August 18, 1920, it was a very different America for women. Without the right to vote, they virtually had no rights to their name. All rights were held by men in their lives.
The legal theory is known as coverture. The woman's covered by her father until she marries, by her husband after that. What that meant was that a woman could not own any property that she inherited, any money that she might earn belonged to her husband.
It was in this climate that the push for women's suffrage, or women's right to vote, began. July 1848 was a moment most point to as a launch of the suffrage movement, when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the Seneca Falls Women's Convention in New York.
Many people think that's the beginning point. I don't. I go back to 1776. In the spring of that year, Abigail Adams wrote a remarkable letter to her husband, John, who was in Philadelphia debating the Declaration of Independence. And in that letter, she asked him to remember the ladies in your new form of government. And he responds, "You're just a saucy little thing. We're not even going to think about this," and makes a very patronizing joke out of it. I think that Abigail was just articulating what was already in the air. At least one woman was calling for a voice in government, and that's what a vote is.
72 years after Adams' letter to her husband, America was ripe for change. But just as the suffrage movement was gaining momentum, it suffered a setback with the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The suffragists endured, and by 1917, two main factions within the movement had emerged.
The mainstream wing, headed by Carrie Chapman Catt, and then the radicals, who were very much to the left of the mainstream, headed by Alice Paul. Eventually, this becomes the National Women's Party. And these are the women who, by 1917, are picketing the White House. And they were relentless about it. Now, by today's standards, it was a very genteel, a very decorous, a very polite picketing. They stood silently with banners. But some of those banners had slogans referring to Kaiser Wilson, because he was not going to deal with Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. Eventually, he had to deal with Carrie Catt and the mainstream.
Eventually, President Wilson came out in support of suffrage in 1918. In June 1919, the Senate passed a bill that would become the 19th Amendment. It then went to the states for ratification, where it continued to be an uphill battle in the South.
And it came down to a long, hot summer in Nashville.
In August 1920, pro- and anti-suffragist groups descended on Tennessee for a special session of the state legislature. After much debating, the vote was 48 to 48. The tiebreaker would be a 23-year-old representative from Tennessee who strongly opposed suffrage.
Harry Byrne was the youngest member of the Tennessee legislature. On the day of the vote, he votes to ratify. People were shocked, stunned on both sides. Nobody expected Harry Byrne to vote as he did. And there were immediate concerns that he had been bought. What happened to make Harry Byrne change his mind?
Byrne had not been bought. He had been persuaded by the most influential woman in his life.
In his coat pocket, he had a letter that he had just received from his 80-year-old mother saying, "Be a good boy, Harry, and if it comes down to your vote, help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification." Harry Byrne did what his mother asked him to do.
With that, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify, and the 19th Amendment would be constitutional law.
It is really impossible to overestimate the importance of the 19th Amendment. Women winning the right to vote in the United States signified the first time, and still the only time in the history of the world, where over half of a nation's population won a fundamental right democratically without the use of any violence.